there's this constant, deliberate effort to undermine every civic institution, every constitutional institution, so that they can get their way in terms of policy and politics. First up is the news that I think should make all patriots upset, which is another attack by a Democratic politician, this time Ms. Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, who filed an extraordinary, reckless, and abusive indictment against President Trump and 18 others over their efforts under the First Amendment, the federal law, the Constitution, and their rights as citizens of the United States. In the case of President Trump, his powers as chief executive and other government officials' powers in their capacities over in the Justice Department. And in the case of Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, he was working for President Trump at the government at the time. And what they're trying to do is criminalize the basic work of disputing an election. The January 6 indictments here of President Trump pale in comparison in terms of the scope, breadth, and abuse of power, in terms of attacking the constitutional civil liberties of many, many Americans. It's about as bad as it gets in Georgia when it comes to the rule of law. And I have the indictment here. It's 98 pages or so. And you may recall it was a circus. The clerk for the court accidentally, supposedly, posted the indictment hours before it was voted upon and finalized by the grand jury, which suggests that, in evidence first, in the process afterward, verdict first and then the process afterwards. This is an Alice in Wonderland approach to prosecutions. It's when you see this district attorney come out and say she wants to have a trial, now it looks like the day before the Super Tuesday primaries. I think 10 or 12 states will have primaries the next day, including all 19 defendants. And, I immediately think of the Stalinist show trials, and I commented on Fox News the other day. What are they going to do? Put people in cages and have people throw things at them? But this is the state we're in when you have the Democratic Party across the country target basically use the powers entrusted to them where they are in official positions. To try to prosecute and jail their political opponents, not because of misconduct or crimes, but because they took the wrong political positions in the 2020 election. And this was my initial reaction to it here at Judicial Watch the other day. Here's my initial reaction to the fourth, if not the fifth, unprecedented indictment of President Trump. Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with the latest on the crazed indictment of President Trump down in Fulton County, Georgia. It's all about power politics. It's not about the rule of law. And frankly, there's a national Democrat conspiracy to try to jail Trump in the middle of the presidential election. 4 indictments in about 5 months. Who are they kidding? This is nothing but politics, and most dangerously, they're trying to criminalize core First Amendment speech. They don't want anyone to dispute elections, and if they don't like what they're saying, as they're seeing in Fulton County, they'll try to jail you, not only President Trump, but other people around him who are doing their jobs under law and exercising their rights as free people in the United States of America. I think any government official, both in Georgia, here in Washington, D.C., and up in New York, have a responsibility to shut down these craven and politicized indictments of President Trump. Our republic is at stake. Do you agree? I agree with that guy. I think he was very articulate. But it's difficult to improve upon that, don't you think? We're in a constitutional crisis with the targeting of Trump. This is the 5th indictment, if you count. So you had the indictment related to Mar-a-Lago. Then you had I think, a superseding indictment, so that's a double, so there's two. You had the indictment against Trump here in Washington, D.C. You have, so that's number three. You have the fourth indictment up in New York by Soros-funded prosecutor Alvin Bragg, a Democratic Party official, over a settlement agreement President Trump had engaged in. And now here's the fifth indictment. So that's 5 months, 5 indictments. I mean, to kind of describe it that way is to highlight the political nature. And of course, all of them want to have trials next year in the middle of the election. As I said, the Fulton County prosecutor wants a trial in March. The case up here in D.C., the government wants to go to trial against Trump in January. In Florida, they had sought a trial, I think, in December, but the judge kicked it to May. And on top of that, there are these civil cases brought by New York Democrats in which Trump is going to have to face trial either directly or indirectly. And so it's the most massive election interference operation by state and federal authorities acting under color of law. You know, this is the irony here. You know, they charged Trump with acting under color of law in one of the cases to deprive people of their whatever. I mean, I'm not sure what he's depriving of who's being deprived of any rights when he challenges an election. But here this is what the government is doing, is they are using the power they have under color of law to deprive Trump and try to deprive Trump and others of their civil liberties. And in the case of Georgia, they've used this racketeering statute in Georgia, which is pretty broad. And as you might remember, racketeering is usually used against the mafia. It should have been used against the Biden family and still should be used given the nature of their activities. And in order to generate the racketeering charge, the Georgia prosecutor goes through and lists a series of acts, right? And she calls them overt acts. And they're all virtually innocent, lawful activities by the individuals, either those who are indicted or those she calls unindicted co-conspirators. And so Mark Meadows asking for a phone number is an overt act and part of this conspiracy. A Department of Justice official asking another Department of Justice official, you know, to consider drafting and sending out a letter saying the Justice Department is investigating voter fraud, that's another overt act. All of which is legal, right? Legal activities, but they're saying are overt acts in furtherance of a conspiracy. Now, when you point out the absurdity and the abuse of basically highlighting First Amendment speech and calling it part of a conspiracy, the left comes out and says, oh, no, we understand that. This doesn't mean it's illegal. It's just part of the process in charging a racketeering case. But you're accusing people of engaging in a conspiracy. So don't pretend it's, you know, just because it's listed seemingly absurd, you know, where they're trying to, for instance, put Mark Meadows in jail for asking for a phone number. Don't pretend that it doesn't mean what it says it means, which is that they are trying to criminalize obviously innocent activity to try to jail Trump in the middle of the presidential election campaign. Now, we've known this is coming for some time, and I want to know what Georgia's going to do about it. Because last I checked, the DA of Fulton County isn't the king of Georgia. The state government obviously constitutionally has the ability to rein this in. And the question is the state government, the state governor, the legislature, and other responsible officials going to stand in the gap for the rule of law and shut this down? And if not, why not? And I think certainly if you're a voter in Georgia, and other citizens have a right to communicate with the government of Georgia as well, you should be asking them what are they going to do, and if not, why not? Now, my understanding of the pardon process in Georgia is that under the current rules, there's a kind of a committee that only pardons people after they've served their sentences, more or less. I'm not quite sure if that's a law or regulation, but it doesn't matter. Let's say it's a law and it has to be changed. Well, then the law should be changed to allow a governor or another responsible official to pardon people directly so that they can pardon Trump and these other innocents who have been attacked here and maligned. I mean, they're going after Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani. Some of these are friends of Judicial Watch. I mean, we're friendly with Giuliani. John Eastman, great man. Mark Meadows, another good guy. Who else do I know here? Jenna Ellis, another friend of Judicial Watch we've been friendly with in the past. And it looks like, and Sidney Powell, a fine lawyer. And it looks like a whole host of other citizens and public officials and campaign officials who were exercising their rights under law to challenge an election. And what she supposes in this case is that the questions about the election in Georgia had no basis. And that's a lie. Dare I say it, this indictment is an overt act in a Democratic Party conspiracy managed by Joe Biden and his appointees and political party allies in the party and in Congress and in the states and in the Justice Department to deprive Americans of their right to select a president free of malign interference by the federal government and state officials such as Alvin Bragg and Ms. Willis in Georgia. Okay? Two can play at this game. They're trying to deprive you of your civil right to vote by essentially taking away a candidate unlawfully. And the law doesn't allow that. So, but of course the Justice Department's part of the conspiracy, so they're never going to indict themselves. So Governor Kemp can bring back the legislature early on an emergency basis to deal with these issues, to rein in the district attorney, change the law to eviscerate this case, change the law to allow pardons so that all of this can be shut down. But Governor Kemp doesn't like President Trump, and evidently he doesn't want to do this. On top of that, Congress, which is in the middle, as I talked about last week, of a 7-week vacation. 7-week vacation. They call it the August recess. Now, their definition of an August recess is, I guess, the end of July through the middle of September. Congress, at least the House, is not coming back until September 12th. So Speaker McCarthy considered this to be an emergency. He'd call the House back and start taking action. And as we've been discussing here, and some others have highlighted, there's not a darn thing that's going on that you don't like here that Congress can't do something about. They can defund Jack Smith. They can, for instance, refuse to allow funding for Fulton County or New York City or maybe even the state of Georgia. If all of Georgia, their political establishment, wants to turn our presidential elections over to one district attorney and a judge, I guess the judge who's assigned, I don't know if he's a good judge or not, but he's been on the bench 6 months and he's 34 years old. So, you know, he's probably had not much experience. But, I mean, he could be the best judge in the world, but should he be running our campaign, presidential campaign? Should Judge Chutkan be running our presidential campaign, or Judge Cannon? I forget the name of the judge up in New York, but we didn't vote for these judges to run our presidential campaigns. And we shouldn't tolerate politicians abusing their powers to try to jail their political opponents and undermine our republic in a way it's never been undermined in American history. So if Congress wants to do it, they can shut it down. They can defund this. They can curtail funding for the states until they start respecting the civil rights of their citizens. They can demand criminal investigations through funding restrictions and requirements of not only what's going on in New York and Georgia, but what went on here in Washington, D.C., not only of the Biden corruption, but the Justice Department corruption to cover up the Biden corruption. And as I noted last week, maybe they don't fund government. Maybe we have a government shutdown until Biden resigns. I mean, you just can't come out and say Biden's the worst, most corrupt person in the history of the world and then do nothing about it. And that's what they're expecting us to tolerate as voters and as citizens. They'll just complain and complain and not do anything. And they get documents, which is good, and they do hearings, which is good, and it's much better than in the past from our friends in the House. Jim Jordan's been doing good and doing a good job, and Comer has been doing a good job as well. He runs the Oversight Committee. But it's not enough. It's necessary, but not sufficient, right? And so we need to clean house and protect our republic from those who would undermine it and those who are attacking it. I mean, just this week, you also had them attacking the Supreme Court again, trying to pressure Justice Thomas for violating ethics rules that aren't ethics rules. So they make up ethics rules and say that he violated them. I mean, there's this constant, deliberate effort to undermine every civic institution, every constitutional institution, so that they can get their way in terms of policy and politics. And when things like this happen, both the charges in Washington, D.C. and the charges in Georgia and New York, we go into a post-constitutional period. Now, does it mean we can't get back to constitutional government? No, of course it doesn't mean that. So I'm not saying that the country is over, but I'm saying it could be over unless we recognize what's happened and try to fix it and mitigate it and hold those responsible who have violated our constitutional system in an appropriate way. And that means defunding them, prosecuting them where appropriate. Certainly we shouldn't tolerate what's going on in Georgia and New York and here in Washington, D.C. And so if you're concerned about this, and certainly if you're a Georgia resident, you should communicate with your elected officials there. And in Congress, you can communicate with Congress saying, what are they going to do? They have a trick to end this. It's called turning off the taxpayer spigot of funds. Or if they turn it on, it's only with certain requirements. And the question is, are they going to do that? And if they're not going to do it, maybe they don't care about this corruption. That would be the conclusion I would draw. They don't care about it. And they're happy to see the country fall apart because it's too politically difficult to do the right thing. And I'm not talking about Democrats. I'm talking about Republicans in this regard. So this is an attack on the First Amendment. The 12th Amendment, right? That's the amendment that guides how our elections are supposed to be run. The 14th Amendment. The 6th Amendment, they're trying to outlaw legal advice. If you get legal advice they don't like, they want to put the lawyers in jail. And what they're effectively trying to do is freeze the presidential campaign of President Trump and the entire Republican Party. Because effectively, when you read this indictment, when you look at what the Justice Department, the Biden regime is arguing, they're saying any communication effectively that President Trump might have with anyone about any of these issues could be subject to scrutiny by a criminal court. And he may have to answer for in court. And anyone talking to him may have to answer. I know in this case, in this indictment, some people have commented, it looks like they're trying to slide Judicial Watch into this mess. And I know already we've been called as a witness in this case up here in Washington, D.C. I told you about the grand jury appearance I had to suffer through for 4 hours of political debate with these Biden prosecutors. So as Trump has said, he's right. It's not just about Trump. They're trying to get him, but they're also trying to get you. If you are an opponent of the Biden administration, you have concerns about election integrity. And it's not just these prosecutions of Trump. I think it was in Michigan. They're targeting those who are involved in trying to get alternative slates of electors going. They're trying to criminalize being an American. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.